Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Samyang AF 35mm F1.8. Now, this is the newest in the series that Samyang calls their Tiny series, and I'm a fan of this series not only because the lenses are nice and compact, which is something I think that is maybe undervalued in today's lens design market, but particularly after just having reviewed a camera like the Sony a7C, it reminds me that there are still a lot of people that are looking for small and light as a part of their mirrorless philosophy. And I don't know that anyone has done as an effective job as Samyang in producing at least prime lenses that, fulfill that mission of being compact light while not really compromising optically. Now, if you want a more in-depth look at the lens, I recommend that you take a look at the definitive review where I go into more detail. Today, we're going to give you the highlights of performance and features here. So starting with those features, I have been delighted to see, when I started reviewing these lenses, I basically had a couple of complaints and recommendations to Samyang. I wanted to see an AF-MF switch on the barrel, and I wanted to see weather sealing in them. I'm delighted to say that starting with the AF 75mm F1.8, a lens that I really enjoyed, you actually now have not only an AF-MF switch, but a custom switch on the side that allows you to program the ring on it, which is used for manual focus, but also can be used in other applications to use it for a few different functions if you have Samyang's lens station for programming that and making those changes. So right now I've got it set up. There's two modes. In custom mode 1, the ring actually functions as an aperture ring, which is great. You can control aperture from that ring, which I personally enjoy. Not everyone does. I do. But then I can switch down into mode 2 and I automatically go into manual focus mode. And of course, then aperture control reverts to the camera and I can manually focus. And manual focus is quite good. The damping is, I think, at a good level. And obviously, it's not a replacement for a true manual focus lens in terms of the tactile response. There's no distance markings or things like that. However, the ring does seem to operate in a linear fashion, which means that you can, actually set a spot and return to it, even if you alter the speed in doing so. And so, I give them good marks there. And you can, tweak that behavior a little bit. It's not like you have, dozens of options, but you have around 3 or 4 options that you can program into these specific modes. I'm also delighted to say that they have added weather sealing. So weather sealing with a gasket at the lens mount. There's a seal at the switch. There is a seal at the focus ring here. And then there is one at the front element. So you basically have the exact same seal points as what you've got in the Sony FE 35mm F1.8. And so now you're really giving up very little in terms of features. Beyond that, while the barrel is primarily engineered plastics, it's built around a metal lens mount. It's solidly constructed. I've had zero problems with the lenses from this series that I have already owned for a while, and they have held up nicely. And you also get a really compact size, 210 grams and only about 65 millimeters in length. And so that makes it about, around 70 grams lighter than the Sony and about 10 millimeters shorter. It's a tiny bit narrower in diameter, but only a ½ millimeter. You won't notice that. But we do have a very common 58mm front filter thread, 9 rounded aperture blades, and so what we have here is a compact, lightweight lens that also is nicely built and has a decent set of features here. You're really giving up next to nothing when you compare it to the Sony, even though I think that the Sony is probably, a little bit better built, but you would be hard-pressed to put your finger on exactly where. The same is true when we talk about autofocus, because now Samyang is employing their linear focus motors, identical to what Sony is using, and so what I've got here is near instantaneous focus. I can go from a close focus object to infinity with basically zero lag in between, no noise, no drama. And if we look at focus pulls for video, we can see that they're both quiet and smooth. Let's take a peek. So obviously, basically no noise there, and beyond that, you have a nice, confident, but very smooth transition between, distant focus points, which I think is probably what most people want when it comes to video AF. I also had very good results when it came to IAF, and in a natural light portrait session, I had consistently perfectly focused results. I used the A7C for that portrait session. Every result was perfectly focused, very nice end results, as you can see. I also did a second session using strobes, the new Godox AD300 Pro, which I'm currently reviewing and we'll have a review of shortly. Great flash, by the way. But in that, it was a really complicated setup because I was remote triggering. I needed to be in the frame. I had, also control units for, flash ratios, multiple flashes going. And so a lot of moving pieces, and then trying to, orient my family and myself in the frame. And so I've been in that situation before, and I've gotten some, let's just say, less than perfectly focused results because I'm not behind the camera, and I was using the A7R Mark III for that, which, while it has a good focus system, of all the cameras that I currently own, it has the least great focus system. And so, I've had results that were misfocused before because the camera, for whatever reason, chose some object other than the people in the frame. But in this case, I came home to perfectly focused results that I was really happy with. And so I would say autofocus performance, again, like I said about build, I suspect that in an absolute sense, maybe the Sony is a hair better in terms of autofocus, but I couldn't really tell you where. And so I think that you're giving up very little, if anything, when it comes to autofocus. The same is true when we talk about image quality. And so as I begin to break down the image quality, first of all, I found that at wide open f1.8 that there is good sharpness across the frame. Contrast is a little bit reduced, and that is because there are a bit of uncorrected chromatic aberrations that will particularly show up as some green fringing, greenish blue fringing after the plane of focus. And so what happens is that as you stop down past f2, that chromatic aberration starts to disappear, and by f2.8 you have radically sharper, higher, well, not so much sharper, but radically higher contrast in results that exceed what you're able to get with the Sony lens. And particularly at the edges of the frame, I found the Samyang was a bit sharper, but also all across the frame. It has a little bit more sharpness and more contrast, particularly at f2.8 and beyond. But even at f1.8, it gives you a little bit better performance. Now, the Sony is better in controlling the chromatic aberrations. It also is a little better close up. The Samyang has a magnification of 0.17 times, while the Sony has a 0.24 times magnification. So obviously a better end result, but also the results themselves are a little bit sharper at wide apertures. You're going to get better close-up results if you're, again, closer to f2.8 with the Samyang lens. But that minor difference beside, I think that we've got a lot of great things. Now, the bokeh quality, beauty is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to bokeh. I found that in certain situations, the bokeh was very nice and creamy. And then there are distances with, a not super wide lens with a not super wide maximum aperture where, things got a little bit busier. The same is true, of course, for the Sony lens as well. You can judge from these shots, how you like the bokeh from the lens. At the end of the day, however, what is pretty clear is that while there's a little bit of give and take, the Samyang is every bit as good as what the Sony is. And so I think the conclusion at the end of the day is that when you're talking about a lens that is $400 versus a lens that on sale right now is $700 US and typically retails for $750 US, that tells me that there's going to be a lot of people that look and say, well, if I can get basically the same performance out of a lens that costs, nearly half as much, then that's going to be a very tempting alternative. And I think that that's exactly the right way to view this lens and its place in the market. There will still be some that prefer the first-party reliability and feel more comfortable with the Sony lens, and if that's you, go for it. I really like the Sony lens. However, I also really like the Samyang lens, and of course, if you're on a budget, this is a much cheaper and very tempting alternative. It's a lot of lens for $400. Now, one other thing that I do want to mention is that Samyang does have an autofocus 35mm f1.4 for Sony that right now, because market prices or market pressures have dropped the price over the last several years, it is now available at around $500 US. And so a lot of you might consider, well, shouldn't I spend the extra $100 to go for the, the pro grade f1.4 lens? There's a few reasons why my answer to that is actually no. Now, there are things about the f1.4 that I prefer. You know, the potential for creating more background blur is obviously one of them. You know, f1.4 is valuable in a 35mm lens. However, this lens, there's a few reasons why I prefer it. First of all, it is 3 times lighter. It is 2 times shorter. And so, form factor, the 35mm f1.4 is actually quite a large lens. This is a very compact lens. So that's one reason. Autofocus is much more reliable with this lens. I did own the Samyang 35mm f1.4 for a while. I ended up selling it, mostly because I didn't find that the autofocus was consistent enough to be relied on in crucial situations. That's not at all true here, where I got very well accurately focused results, even in, you know, an event setting like my church, where I shot wide open and at ISO values of 1600 or 3200, I still got great focus results, which I couldn't always say. IAF works better here. Also, we've got weather sealing here. I just think that although it's not the pro-grade lens in terms of aperture, it is a more pro-grade lens in terms of absolute performance when you consider all the metrics. So there's my 2 cents on that. Of course, your mileage may vary. If you'll check out the description down below, there is linkage to my full text review, also to an image gallery if you want to look at more photos. Beyond that, there's also buying links if you want to purchase one for yourself. There's also linkage there to follow me on social media or to become a patron. You can sign up for my new newsletter that goes out once a week and keeps you abreast of all the recent events that are taking place and new reviews that are coming out. If you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. We're getting near 100,000, and with your help, we're going to get past that mark. And as always, thanks for watching today. Have a great day.